Welcome to the Nerd Review. This is the show where we talk about movies, TV shows, video games, books, and comic books. You're listening to episode 8, and today we're talking about horror movies. These are some of my favorite movies. We are well into the month of October. Spook season has begun on the lead up to Halloween. I am doing a 31 nights of Halloween horror, attempting to watch at least 31 horror movies, or Halloween-themed movies. They're not all your R-rated horror movies, but they're Halloween just the same. So let's jump into horror movies, shall we? Now, horror movies are some of my favorite movies. Going back all the way back to when I was around 7 years old, I would say I started watching the Halloween-themed movies. I grew up watching Scooby-Doo, and I always liked a good ghost story. And probably the best example I can think of one of my first viewings of a horror movie was the first viewing of Resident Evil for me. So if you can picture a small computer room in the early 2000s, it's just big enough for a desk, maybe a bookcase, and a small table, behind your computer chair for some stuff. And so my uncle at the time, he's good at uTorrent and pirating. So we've gotten ourselves a bootleg copy of Resident Evil 1, the first Resident Evil movie. And picture the CRT, the tiny CRT monitor, and my uncle sitting in the computer chair, and my brother, who's about 2 years older than me, so he'd have been 9 at the time, and he's sitting next to him in the chair. And so the only way for me to see the screen is to take a third chair and put it on that table that was behind my uncle, and I'm sitting on the on the chair on the table, and I'm sitting on the chair so that I can see above his head, over his shoulders, and look down at this 14-inch CRT monitor and a bootleg, a hand camera, a camcorder, like somebody snuck in a video recorder into the theater in the early 2000s to record this movie, and that's the first horror movie I watched. That was the first time I see it. When you think about it too, it's like it was a horrifying situation. Like I would never watch a movie in that type of low quality, low resolution, shaky hand cam. Like now it's just worth it to wait. Just go see the movie in theaters or wait until it comes out on a streaming platform. But back then, this was an acceptable scenario to enjoy some entertainment. I remember everybody getting in a little bit of trouble. I was considered too young to be watching the movie. The first Resident Evil was decently graphic. There was really good special effects, and that's probably I trace that back to being like the first time I wasn't overly scared, right? I was more enthralled and I enjoyed watching the movie, and I was mature enough, let's say it, I was mature enough. I like to think so that I grasped that this was fake. I wasn't traumatized by the depictions of zombies on screen. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and thus started my yearning for more horror movies. And at the beginning, it was a tough go because when you're 7 or 8 years old, and you're like, I want to watch this new horror movie, I want to watch this, you get a resounding no, you're too young. And so it was a lot of late night, rummaging through my uncle's or my, the grown-ups VHS or DVD collection, and sneaking downstairs when everyone was asleep so that my brother and I could sneak in this R-rated or PG-13, 16 movie and just have a grand old time of scaring the bejesus out of ourselves while watching some of these more adult films that weren't intended for the eyes of your 7, 8, and 10-year-olds. But that was the thing to do back then, and oh man, those are some good memories. And it definitely led to a lifelong enthusiasm about, I guess I'm passionate about horror movies, and I love the lead up to Halloween. I'm gonna watch, I said it in the intro that it's called the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror. That's what I like to call it, and I try to watch at least one movie a night. Sometimes I get up on a Saturday, I can watch up to 4 or 5 movies. My girlfriend and I just post up on the sofa and just crack them out one after the other. we actually just did that this week. We started with the new movie with Pete Davidson, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. That's a great slasher comedy. So there's definitely the it breaks down. Some people they clump it in horror movies, but horror movies, they fall into the category of Halloween movies, and Halloween movies sometimes fall into the category of horror movies. And there's your slasher movies, your horror movies. I'm just gonna say it up front. There's your torture porn movies, and you're talking like Saw and Hostel, and some of them get a bit gratuitous, and that's not for everybody. But there's definitely like a breakdown, a category of different kinds of horror. You got your psychological horror, your body horror. You got your just straight up gore movies. So like think Hellraiser. That's actually what we're watching. Some of the movies that we're watching right now as part of my 2020 Halloween horror marathon. We're making our way through the Hellraiser franchise. There's 11 movies, including one that just came out this month, this 2022. The 11th Hellraiser movie just actually came out, which is incredible. It's really incredible that we still get these longevity, these franchises that go, Hellraiser, the newest one, 2022, and the original one, 1988, 1987, something like that. Like we're talking 30 years of horror franchise. And Pinhead, if you're familiar with the franchise, the Cenobites, it's amazing. It's one of the things that drew me to horror movies. These long, decade arcing franchises with these characters that have been established so long ago that just keep coming back iteration after iteration. And it's kind of it flips this whole script of, the good guys always win. Well, in these horror movies, the bad guys always win. And if you've watched a Friday the 13th movie or a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, at the end, it looks like, they escaped and they lived, and then the last scene is like and like somebody just gets like stabbed, or in your somebody just jumps out, and Michael never dies, Jason never dies, Freddy, they always find a way to come back. And sometimes it's original, sometimes the way that they come back is a bit derivative, it's trite, they just replay over and over again. Oh, you thought you killed him that time, but he found a way to come back. Somebody's gonna light the black candle, or they're gonna sacrifice the virgin, they're gonna bleed innocently on the tribal markings on the ground that will resurrect the soul of their dead brother. I'm getting a bit specific. That's the first Hellraiser movie. That's how the whole thing started. The guy bled in the room where his brother had died, and it allowed him to escape from hell and come back. And there's a bunch of family hijinks ensues, and everybody dies. So that's a little bit of a spoiler for the original Hellraiser, which I was like I was saying, I was just watching those, and one of the things I always found hilarious about the first Hellraiser was that it's quintessentially being like, it's obviously that they're in England. The house, the whole design of the aesthetic of this area is England, but for some reason they keep trying to sell you the fact that they're in America, and there's like, well, I love living in Detroit. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? You clearly don't live in America. That was quite amusing. I looked into that, and it was apparently to boost sales in America. They wanted people to relate to it, and they thought that if they told people, or they acknowledge the fact that they're clearly in England, that people wouldn't like the movie as much. All these weird statistics they get are interesting like that. I'm curious who came up with that, the marketing statistic that if people knew that, or not knew, like the audience clearly knows. Like it's really hard to tell you that this obviously British house on this obviously British street in this obviously England area is not Detroit, America. No matter how many opening scenes you show of downtown Detroit, when you cut to this house, just no. So trying to deceive the audience or convince us otherwise is just we're not stupid. It's asinine. But I digress on my little tangent of that weird aspect of the first Hellraiser. So what I was saying about the genres. So I like all of them. There's the PG-13, your teen slasher movies. So you're not going to have blood in those movies. People are going to get stabbed, in the stomach, and you're not going to see it. You're going to see a zoom in of their face, and they're just like, oh, you stabbed me. How could you do that? And think like your Marvel level violence. That's your PG-13 slasher movies. Examples would be like Escape Room, or anything that they play on TV. The Escape Room movies were really good. I enjoyed those. Your teen scream type stuff. So there's a few series that also fall into that one, but they're also pushing the envelope on what teen scream means, because it's not always PG-13 in the teen scream. So like we're really like we're splitting hairs here now. You know, like the genres are very niche almost. Like there's not niche, but like what's another word for niche? Very specific. Yeah. So like you have your teen scream, and then you have your PG-13 teen scream, but then you could have I'm off the top of my head from Amazon. They had the remake of, well, not the remake, the adaptation of I Know What You Did Last Summer, which I will just say off the top, wow, they did such an amazing job adapting I Know What You Did Last Summer from those terrible movies, slasher movies from the 90s with Jennifer Love Hewitt. They were I mean, the title in and of itself was I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then the sequel was I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. Like, wow, okay, so you didn't suffer a head injury and forget everything that I did last summer? That was great. Like, so those movies just I can't say enough about how just terrible they are. Like they're the classic, a studio, not classic in the sense that they're classic movies. It's classic in the sense that the studio needed to make a horror movie in response to other studios making good horror movies, but what they ended up making was nowhere near a good horror movie. It's just cliche after cliche, and terrible writing, terrible decision making. And while a lot of people will say that's par for the course in a horror movie, it's true, but sometimes you don't want it to be so blatantly obvious that the characters are just stupid and poorly written. That's just, there should be one or two stupid characters, and depending on which movie you're watching, there might be some movie magic, or your main character magic, where they're the ones that will never die. They're going to get slashed on the arm, and they're going to get punched a few times, but they'll never take a killing blow. They're the ones that's going to be what we've coined the term lately is final girl. They're going to live, and they're going to be the final one standing. Maybe they're the virgin, or they're the one that abstained from smoking that illegal marijuana. That was very Friday the 13th, and at the time it was pretty much the formula was like, if you drank, smoked, or had sex, these were the things that were going to condemn your soul, so the murderer is going to go after you. The industry has kind of come away from that motif, and there's been some really good movies that have played that up, like, oh really, like I'm gonna die because I'm the girl, or we're all smoking, so we're all gonna die. I mentioned the term final girls. There's a film, Final Girls, I think, is actually the name, right on the money, and that was a great movie. It's a bit of a sci-fi horror movie where the cast, the characters end up going into a horror movie, and then there's all these rules of the horror movie, and those rules in this movie are the rules that we observe. So if you've ever seen the first Scream movie, Wes Craven did this amazingly. It was like a meta horror movie where they kind of well, if this was a horror movie and you're watching the horror movie, and then they doubled down on that. The Scream series, they just made another. Scream 5 just came out last October. This October, there's the Hellraiser, and then there's another Halloween movie that's what's coming out. They just keep cranking them out. And it was this meta, these rules, right? There are these rules of horror that it was kind of established in the first Scream movie. Not established, but it was the first time that somebody kind of just announced it to the audience that this is how horror movies go down, and this is going to be who the killer is, and there's the exposition drop and this and that, and there was really good scenes, and they make fun of it in the Scream movies really well. In the second Scream movie, there's a movie there's a movie about the first events of the first Scream movie called Stab. It's almost like Seinfeld level meta-ness. If anybody's ever seen Seinfeld, there's a whole arc. The show Seinfeld is about the comedian in real life, Jerry Seinfeld, who plays himself, a version of himself on the show, and then in the show he's approached by NBC to make a show about his life, and they call it Seinfeld. So sorry, they called it Jerry. So you're watching Seinfeld, and in the episode of Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld is working with NBC to make a show called Jerry, and then they cast all the characters that you watch on Seinfeld. Like, it's like mind-boggling levels of meta comedy here, and what's fun is that they get to poke fun at themselves, right? They're basically acknowledging it without completely breaking the fourth wall and looking directly at the camera and being like wink wink, which some movies have gotten away with. They've done a really good job. She-Hulk is doing that right now. They look right at the camera and acknowledge the audience, and sometimes it's very funny if it's well done. And that's the meta comedy, slasher comedy. Just like, it's a rainbow of horror. It's like a bloody rainbow of horror. There's so many different genres, and you don't realize that from a distance. Like, if you're not an initiated fan of horror, if you haven't sat down and watched 15, 20, 30, 40 horror movies, you don't really realize that there's this like it's an interesting formula, the way that the characters and like these, are you watching a horror movie where the good guys are going to win and the killers are going to be revealed at the end? Or is it one of these supernatural bad guys who, you're just watching it to see how many people they kill, and like, are they going to figure it out? Like, how is that going to turn out? There's like a multitude of reasons why you're going to watch a horror movie, and it becomes really fun, in my opinion. And it's these rules and these characters and this world building that really drew me in. Like I said before, it's these characters that are set up and established so long ago, and it's these world building series, right, where they establish rules, and they're not hard rules, they're fast and easy rules. Like, they get retconned and they get rewritten in almost basically every entry, but that's one of the things you come to enjoy. Like, in the last movie, Jason is X, Y, and Z, and now in this movie he's ABC, and in the last movie he died this way, and now in this movie, oh, actually he died this way. And you give a script, or you give a concept to a different writer, and you put X amount of years in between the first and the most recent, things aren't going to always add up. And then there's these requels that people like to reference to right now. Scream was a requel, Halloween is a requel. A lot of the best horror movies these lately are being requels, and it's not actually a new term. I recently watched a great video from Mr. Sunday Movies on YouTube about the lifespan of the Hulk, and when they were talking about the Edward Norton one, the director actually quoted that it was a requel, that it was a reboot sequel of the 2003 Eric Bana Hulk. So that's interesting. This term has been around for a really long time, but they just haven't done as many as of late. So now the idea with the requel is it's a reboot sequel, right? So you have the original cast, the people from the original movies, and you're introducing a newer, younger cast, and the goal is to achieve some sort of symmetry, some sort of mesh, and the handing of the baton, the handing of the flame. Maybe your legacy character sacrifices themselves, maybe they die, and the new characters have to carry on. They're pushed to they're spurred on when they see their old friend or maybe family member, or this this seasoned grizzly person that's survived all of these encounters previously. And that's the idea in a requel. So it's very Scream 5, the Halloween trilogy that they're doing right now. It's supposed to erase basically like 13 Halloween movies, and this is the third Halloween 2 basically. That's an interesting concept. And now they're doing the third Halloween 3 also. And that's supposed to end this new trilogy. Even outside of the world of horror, Terminator Dark Fate, that was considered a requel. They erased, in this movie, they're basically erasing Terminator 3 and saying that this is a direct continuation from Terminator 2. So the events of Terminator 3 and all these other movies are subsequently erased, or if you want to get Marvel about it, it's a different timeline. It's a different different stream of reality, or different universe, maybe multiverse. So this is the new thing on requels in horror movies. And and it just adds another layer of, if you want to take a quote from Shrek, it's a layer of the onion. They also make people cry. So it's a good quote. It's a good reference. Sorry. So it's the layer of an onion, the onion layers of horror movies. You got your requels, and you got your genres, and you got your rules, and it's just a really interesting, area of film. There's so much going on. It's not just like the standard rom-com or like an interesting, the movies are interesting. There's a lot of interesting stories, but in horror, it becomes its longevity. It's 30 years of entries and trying to appease different fans. Maybe some fans, they only they liked the first two. Some fans prefer 4 and 6. Some fans one of my favorites is Jason 10, the 10th Friday the 13th movie, which is Jason in space. Like, a lot of the movies take random sci-fi turns. Yeah, even Hellraiser 4 did that, or Hellraiser 3. No, yeah, Hellraiser 4 randomly in space, which it kind of makes sense because at some point they said that the Cenobites were like extra dimensional travelers that have like gotten blurred the line between pleasure and pain. So it's like, okay, well, we're in space now, and the movies just kind of evolve as new directors and new people want to make a name for themselves. So they take this pre-existing title, this Halloween or Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and they want to do something new, and sometimes it works really well. And as an example of it working really well, in my opinion, would be Freddy versus Jason, which is kind of a really good area of horror, which I'm just hoping will continue. The Versus series, we got Alien versus Predator, Freddy versus Jason, and I'm just hoping for more in that vein. Right now, it's kind of stalemated at those ones. Thankfully, the AVP, we have more than one. There's Aliens versus Predator, and then AVP Requiem, which again split the audiences. There's people that like on both sides of the fence. They prefer AVP 1, or maybe they prefer neither. But in my opinion, the Freddy versus Jason was a great attempt at like kind of bringing back Freddy too, because like if you had watched the last Nightmare on Elm Street, he was like sent to hell and there was no way for him to come back, and so he uses Jason to like instill fear again. But then Jason just like he doesn't stop killing people, and then it turns into like Freddy needs to stop Jason so that he can kill people. It was really interesting, like they kind of just like turned the bad guys on each other, and the humans were like, okay, let them fight it out. Maybe they'll kill each other and they'll stop killing us. So it was really well written. I really enjoyed that movie. That was a good combination of two of the best horror slasher series that we have right now. And for me, I like all of these movies. All the genres, the whole bloody rainbow of horror, Halloween, whatever you want to title it. I like them all. I like the psychological, I like the thrillers, I like the teen scream, the PG-13, the rated R, the really out there ones. They're all, there's something to enjoy in all of them. And I really encourage people to watch, more horror movies. It gets your heart rate up. It kind of is a bit macabre. It's a weird enjoyment. There's something about this macabre interest. I've done a little bit of research on, having a fascination with the macabre, and it connects to like sports and the gladiator arena. It's basically the same effect when you're watching other people in these kind of situations. It still gives you the reaction. You have like an elevated heart rate, your pupils dilate, and if you can have that reaction with horror, it kind of like you're fixated on the screen the same way you would be on a gladiator fight, a sports match, anything. That's the same reaction. And that's where this macabre fascination, and people have these interests. And it's definitely for me, like I'm watching, a good horror movie or something, and I'm focused on the screen. And if you walk up behind me and like tap me on the shoulder, take a step back, because I'm gonna go through the roof. You're gonna scare the bejesus out of me. Like, you get so fixated, the world around you falls away, and you're watching. You're going down this hallway, and it's do 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 do. I think that was the Mario theme song, or is it wrong theme song? Like it's if it's Halloween movies. Oh man, I know all of these. Like no, oh wow. I think I just did a nightclub. No, I'm spacing. So it's like it's a scary atmosphere, and you're just fixated on the screen, and you're getting this like not psychosomatic. Oh man, I'm going blank for words here. You're enthralled and you're fixated, and it's giving you this adrenaline rush, and you're so engrossed, that's the word I'm looking for, that somebody could easily sneak up on you and scare you, which would be super rude. Not rude, it would be funny, but it's not a nice thing to do, especially if you're watching a horror movie. Like that's a good way to make somebody pee themselves. But so let's get back to the topic at hand. Why I love horror movies. Let's go there. Practical effects and what a director, what a special effects director, artist, what they can do. As an example, like Tom Savini, he changed zombies from the disoriented people, shuffling around with like white face paint on, to in Dawn of the Dead, to what we saw there. He also worked on Friday the 13th and designed a lot of the kills and the prosthetics and these body doubles that they used, and it's incredible when you watch these older movies and where they started with, and it's all imagination. It's all the amazing imagination that these individuals have, that they can then if they have the budget, and even if they don't have the budget, some of the most amazing practical effects are on low budgets, and practical over VFX. Sometimes it's all because of the budget, but it also does this longevity. It aids in the longevity. You watch Friday the 13th from 30 years ago, and it looks amazing. The body horror, the blood, it has lasting power. And then you watch a movie from the early 2000s that had $1 million budget, and they decided to, in my opinion, waste a good amount of that budget on, at the time, cutting edge technology. But in 5 years, it's almost this like weird, uncanny Cartoon Valley kind of thing you're looking at, and it just pales in comparison to the practical effects. And one of my favorite things nowadays is new movies that utilize practical effects. One of my favorites is The Void. It's by Jeremy Galipsy and Steven Kostanski. Yeah. They're both of the directors, but they're also the art director and special effects artist for the film. And they make films in ode, in like tribute to the 70s style. And it's just amazing that, like, we're talking like the Thing level of creature feature, and The Void is, the movie itself is amazing, but the practical effects that they use, it came out in 2016, and it's just mind-blowing. You're sitting there in a sense of like, oh my god, and it's like that, like you want to look away, car crash scenario, but like you're just like, you got your hand up in front of your face and you're kind of like looking through your fingers at the screen. You just can't pull yourself away, and that right there is like one of the best things for me. It's like, it's disturbing, but like also at the same time I know it's not real, and in my mind I know I'm gonna go up after it. I'm like, how did they do that? How did you imagine that? And then the process to bring it to life, it's so amazing. The people involved in it are so talented, and it's this next level of artistic genius, in my opinion. And it's like, it's bringing into the real world the crazy imagination. Like, it's not just, you didn't just draw it, you made it, and you made it look so real that you terrify people with that. That's an achievement that I think is just, it should be honored. People should be in reverence of this artistic genius that these special effects artists are able to create, and not just on a computer, but with real mediums, with real animatronic, sometimes puppetry, rubberized flesh that they've spent millions of dollars and decades refining. That's one of the best things about The Void. If you compare it to the Friday the 13th, the first one, the great scene where Kevin Bacon, he's lying in bed and all of a sudden an arrow comes up through his neck. If you watch the HD version of that, you can clearly tell there's a rubberized plastic neck. They did a good job colorizing it. It rips. It doesn't really look like skin. It looks like rubber, but great job. There was, I watched it behind the scenes where, to get the blood to go up out of the wound, there was literally people under the table with a tube and a pump blowing the fake blood solution up out of the wound. And then to compare that to The Void, almost 30 years later, the prosthetic skin that they use, oh my god, it looks like skin. It looks like they took real skin and are starting to rip it up. They went to the behind a hospital and took all the medical waste and then brought it onto the movie set. It's just, oh my god, it's so well done. I could gush about the practical effects for hours, just practical over VFX if you know what you're doing. If you're a Tom Savini or one of the people from The Void, some other ones, Chris Wallace, he won an Oscar for his special effects works on The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. Be afraid, be very afraid. There's just if you have one of these guys, Rick Baker, he won he won an Oscar for best makeup effects. These guys they are they're just geniuses, man. You gotta watch some of their movies and you'll understand what I'm talking about here, what I'm gushing about at this point. So the movie that Rick Baker he got his Oscar for was his work on American Werewolf in London. It's a great horror comedy from 1981. So if you like horror movies, werewolf movies, some of the best ones are Soldier Dogs. That was a great medium budget movie, and there's also the Ginger Snaps series, which I had planned on watching all of them. I think I only ever watched the first one, so I have them on my 2022 Halloween horror marathon list for this year. So that's another one that I'm going to be watching. Practical effects people, if you just look up a list of good practical effects horror movies, and you won't be disappointed. If the new stuff is a bit too grotesque, or it's going to make you a bit squeamish, maybe look up some of the older stuff. Practical effects, they hold up, so they look great, but the older stuff, it's a bit easier to be like, oh, okay, his head didn't actually get chopped off, which, I mean, let's acknowledge the fact that horror movie is still fantasy. We're not watching fucked up snuff films from the internet. We're watching entertainment, and I mentioned it at the top of the episode. There is your torture porn. People do play into that with your Saw movies. At the beginning there was some semblance of a good horror movie in Saw, and then it just kind of dissipates, deteriorates is another word for it, into the later entries of the Saw. It just this Jigsaw character, he keeps corrupting more people, and it just kind of got to overuse a word, trite and cliche, and so then there was the Hostel series, and I mean, don't get me started on Human Centipede. The guy for that movie, he left out that what the Human Centipede would be until they had already started filming, if I remember correctly, and then they had already put a lot of money into it, so they just let him finish, and nobody was happy about that. But those movies are pretty messed up, and they just kind of play into this smaller niche, and it's not all about that. Your Final Destination movies are probably really up there in the gore and splash effects. Though funnily enough, those are some of my favorite movies, and again, they just never stop making them. The first Final Destination movie came out in 2000, and they're making one right now, and I'm so excited for it. I've just been so excited for it since the last one came out, and I still, have a gripe with the director and the studio, because they were like, if this Final Destination movie does well, we're gonna make 2 sequels right away, and it was the best one. It made the most money in the franchise, and we're still waiting for those sequels. Get your act together, people. So once we move away from the practical and stuff, there are some great VFX horror movies. I can't name as many of them, though. That's the funny part. But they're there. They're just as good. Okay, so I will admit I had to pull up a list of CGI horror movies, so I had something here to put in. So Freddy vs. Jason, there we go. That uses VFX, computer, CGI, computer graphic images, and that's, I said it before. It's one of my favorite. It, the remake of It, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Those are absolutely terrifying, and it's all all computer graphics. So they're definitely, they've gotten better over time, but the question for me is, It, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Freddy vs. Jason, those came out still relatively recently, more so for the remakes of the It movies. But will they still look good 10 years from now? Will the VFX, it has this effect, VFX has this effect, it's funny, that it looks amazing now, but through the lens of time, as we continue to progress, did we reach a plateau, or does it just kind of falls to the wayside? And unfortunately, this amazing, movie that came out 2018, 2016, whatever have you, that by maybe 2026, 10 years later, you revisit it and you can notice, you're like, oh, that's not a real scene. Kind of in the way you watch an old movie from the 2000s, and 1 minute you're watching a live action movie, and then it just switches and you're like, oh, that's a cartoon. That VFX scene is a cartoon. The scene that comes to mind when I say that is the first Harry Potter, when they're doing the Quidditch, when they're just learning to fly broomsticks, and at one moment, when Neville, when he goes up into the air, and at one point it's the actual actors, and they're doing a little bit of green screen effect, and then all of a sudden it's just a cartoon child on a fake broomstick and they're just flying around that. I'm curious if that is what's going to happen, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Are we going to look back on these remade horror movies, and are we going to be able to just be like, oh, that's fake? Right now, I don't think obviously you'd be able to tell it's fake, because the giant spider with the giant clacking teeth and stuff, I know that doesn't exist, but it doesn't look cartoon, right? So that's my point. Will it ever become this cartoony aspect where our eyes are like, oh wow, I can recognize that as you can see something about the way that it's laid onto the background? Or did they make it so well that it will stand the test of time, kind of these practical effects? In The Void, they've achieved such a great job on those practical effects. I don't think that in 10 years you'll be able to be like, oh no, that's fake, I can see that skin, skin doesn't rip that way. No, they did a thorough good job. Another great movie that it was the same director as The Void, PG Psycho Goreman. Definitely recommend that one. It's kind of like Power Rangers, in the sense of the way that the characters are designed, but that's a horror comedy, and it's a really good one. I recommend that one a lot. And while talking about things to recommendation, I would definitely recommend Slasher TV. It's a newish kind of idea. I dipped my toes in with the Scream adaptation, and I think that it was probably one of the best ideas, and it lends itself to being adapted. Because it's meta, right? So Wes Craven, the whole idea was that it's a meta on the slasher genre, and so it allowed them to kind of like acknowledge that they're a series. And like there's this whole scene in I believe it's the pilot where they're like, you can't adapt a slasher movie into a series because slasher movies have to rise up really quickly and then there's like a resolve, and you couldn't do that over the course of like multiple episodes. But they were kind of like challenging themselves and like explaining that they could actually do it super well done. And it had like 3 or 4 seasons, and then there's like one extra season that's not affiliated, like it doesn't follow the first 3 because of the deal between MTV and Netflix fell through. So they just so it was just like the final season was just developed by MTV. But both are absolutely amazing. And then there's the Netflix series Slasher, which recently just switched over. Again, the deals fall through. Netflix canceled it, but it got picked up by Shudder, which is a horror streaming platform. Actually, if you're looking for something like that, Shudder would be a great place. They have a good amount of originals that they're still working on, and the next season of Slasher will be a Shudder original now. That was another great. So that's an anthology series, kind of like American Horror Story, which again, great, really freaking great horror TV series. I'm personally just on the end of season 2, Asylum. What's interesting about these ones is they're anthology series, so it's the same main group of actors, but in each season they play different characters telling different stories. So that's American Horror Story, and Slasher. There's a new series called American Horror Stories, which is like it tells stories, like it goes back and tells stories about characters from different seasons of American Horror Story. But I need to watch like 8 more seasons of American Horror Story before I can start watching American Horror Stories. But yeah, Slasher, that was a great one. Each season is about like a different serial killer in a different area, and sometimes it's a little bit supernatural, and sometimes it's just like messed up people doing messed up things, and it's great actors. The first season has Katie McGrath, who's she was on Supergirl, and she's phenomenal in it. And that's a great series. So there's more, like I mentioned before. They adapted I Know What You Did Last Summer. That's on Amazon Prime. There's so many more too. Like there's new ones coming out. Netflix has an amazing series. You always see these like crazy, pretty terrifying little thumbnails, in my opinion, and those just like the little fire, like, oh, what's that? Netflix also has the Fear Street trilogy, which it's not a series, but it's a series of movies. It's not a TV series. That was great. They're actually in the works to make more. They want to expand the Fear Street into like an actual like franchise, its own universe kind of thing, which I'm totally down for. If you saw the Fear Street movies, they take place over like was it the 70s, the 80s. There's Fear Street 1994, and then the most recent one was they were flashing back and forth. It was a great series. Honestly, I couldn't recommend it more. And so the director from that is working with Netflix now. They want to expand it, and the idea is that like every X amount of years in this small town, wherever it is, they're like cursed and somebody goes crazy. And so like every 10 years, every 15 years, there's a serial killer. And so that's in it of itself, just like that means that like if it's happened for like hundreds of years, they in the series they've already teased out all these different different serial killers who had different MOs, and they're all super messed up. Like they gouge your eyes out, or they was a postman that went crazy, or there's a postman that went postal. And so like they would basically be able to do a movie, a TV series, anything on each and every one of these established serial killers. So like that is the bread and butter. Like I said, the series, it builds characters, it builds lore, it builds, it gives you something to argue about with, your diehard film fans of like, well, in this movie they established that, this would happen, but you're like, well, you're not, we're not talking about the movie from the 80s, we're talking about the new one, and they deliberately changed that, and it's just it's so much fun to have an argument, not an argument, just like a debate, like differing of opinions over your your forms of entertainment and these fictional characters who are bound bound by these fictional rules of their how they get resurrected and what can kill them, what can't kill them. Do they have superpowers in this version? At one point I remember that Jason got brought back by lightning or something, and that was when he just becomes like super invulnerable, which also happens in Jason X, the Jason in Space one. He gets dropped into it basically becomes like a liquid Terminator kind of deal, and he's like super Jason. Is just hilarious. It's hilarious at that point. You're watching a horror movie, but you're having a hard time not laughing the entire time, which is like this other funny aspect. And like, yeah, it's funny that you're laughing, but it's this aspect of horror movies of this genre that if you're a fan or you're somebody like me and you're sitting down and you announce like, I'm gonna watch all 11 Friday the 13th movies or all 11 Hellraiser movies, you kind of just acknowledge and accept the fact that you're going to sit down and watch some really terrible movies, because you can't have 11 movies in a franchise and have them all be good. We're not Marvel. We're not the MCU yet. Some of these movies from the 70s, and they kind of they needed better editing. Some of them had poor VFX, let's be honest, but the main your main not Hellraiser. Hellraiser has good effects. The practical effects were really good. Some of the VFX, I'm thinking Hellraiser 2, where like you're going through the hell maze. That was just like, it's clearly a big old background green screen with some tiny little people edited in running around, which is they wanted to do something. They wanted to depict hell, and it didn't translate. They attempted something that didn't translate, but there's some of them are just they're not the greatest movies, but if I did have to pick, not the greatest, but I'm not gonna try to champion something and say it's the greatest movie ever. To me, they're some of the greatest movies ever, but maybe you don't share my opinion. That's totally valid. So if I had to pick some favorites, let's pick some favorites here. The Void, easily at the top of my list. The Void 2006, check that out. It's the one with a big triangle in the background, because there is another movie with a similar name. If it's not The Void, I believe it actually is The Void, but it just came out maybe a couple years later or a couple years earlier. It's kind of a generic name when you think about it. But so 2016 one, look for a big like white triangle, and it takes place in a hospital. I don't want to give away too much. Look up that one. In terms of TV series, I would recommend the Slasher series, the Scream series, anything that's on Amazon Prime or Netflix. Honestly, anything from the last few years, most of them are pretty amazing. They've done a really good job on understanding the genres, and they're just like hard-hitting horror, psychological, good stories, really well paced out. If you're like me, maybe wait for the season to end so that you can binge watch it, so that you don't get left on a cliffhanger, and then you gotta wait like 6 months or something for the answer, because we all hate that, don't we? Like, everybody loves binge watching and just a whole season dropping at once. That's what we live for. It's what I live for. It's what I'm looking forward to. I see a new, series. I know I'm waiting for the new Slasher series. I'm waiting for a new season of, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I want the entire thing at once. And if it's airing on Disney, we know that we're not going to get that. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. In my opinion, the only reason to continue doing a serial release for a streaming show, wow, that's a lot of S's, serial release for a streaming show, is to keep your name and your platform in the headlines. You have a 10 episode season, you have 10 episodes to air, and you put one episode out for 10 weeks, and you're in the headlines, and everybody's talking about you every week for 10 weeks. And if that earns them more money, gets them more advertising revenue, then that's their decision. But in my opinion and in my habits, I'm gonna wait for week 11, and I'm gonna watch all 10 episodes. So maybe you draw me in no, I will say I succumbed to She-Hulk. I'm waiting for the next episode of She-Hulk, but She-Hulk isn't a horror movie, so let's bring it back in. So after The Void, I would recommend any of the big series. Honestly, we haven't even talked about Chucky. That's one of the best series. Chucky is actually the only series that has the same story from the first movie to the most recent movie. I'm not claiming the series. There's a Chucky series. They adapted. Even Chucky is being still made into a new series. I think there's a season 2 or season 3 coming out. I don't know if that's following the same story, but the movies, all the way back from like Chucky Child's Play 1, 2, Seed of Chucky, Bride of Chucky, then Seed of Chucky, The Curse of Chucky, The Cult of Chucky, they all follow. It's the same Chucky, it's the same bad guy. He died in the first movie, he possessed a doll, and it's been happening the same way. It's the only series that has that. All the other series, no, sorry, that's not true. Scream also has it. So 2 series. Scream still follows the story of Cindy. It's Nev Campbell, and there's some. That's really cool in my opinion, because if you're watching, Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, they just retcon a lot. They change the story. I mentioned that, but in the case of Chucky, it's just the same story. So if you got to watch them in order, then, right? That's what we're saying. You have to watch from the very first movie, then you got to watch the second, the third. There's not as many in the Chucky series. I think there's only 6 or 7, and then there's 2 seasons if you count that. But definitely Chucky makes it to the top of the list. It's kind of hilarious, the Chucky movies, honestly, because it's one of those series. It is a serious movie. It's a serious horror in the beginning. The Chucky Child's Play 1 and 2. By the time we get to Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky, they've brought in the elements of comedy, and if I remember correctly, whatever comes after Bride of Chucky, which I believe is Seed of Chucky, at this point they're famous, and like they're making a movie and they're actually starring in it, and I don't know if they're like acknowledging the fact that the puppets are like former murderers and stuff, but like it gets comical towards the later end of the Chucky movies, and that's it's Chucky, and I still highly recommend it. If you're uninitiated to the Chucky series, definitely look up Chucky. Then it would be your Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the ones we've been talking about this entire episode. Those are some of the great originals. Also check out The Fly, maybe not the second one, the first Fly with Jeff Goldblum. You gotta love that Goldblum magic, and it has that amazing quote like, "Be afraid, be very afraid," which it's kind of funny because like he's just becoming this grotesque fly creature. I feel you would have expected that scene or that line to be from like Hellraiser, or one of the more grotesque everyone's getting murdered, but in this one it was just like some scientist turning into like a mutated fly creature, which was it's a great line either way. So The Fly, like I said, not The Fly 2, that was kind of a bore. They always try to crank out a sequel, but there's no Goldblum, so there was no point, in my opinion. After that, there's so many movies. I've been, as I was saying, I'm doing the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror, and what's impressive is that like this is the 3rd, maybe 4th year I've been doing this. So if you do 30 or 30 plus movies every year, and this is my 4th year, this is like 120 horror movies, and there's still so many more to go. Like I had, the first year it was basically all Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, with 9 movies for Nightmare on Elm Street and 11 movies for Friday the 13th. That's almost 30 movies right there. You got like 20, was that like 19, 20 movies or something like that? It's 21 movies. Yeah, it's 21 movies. That's almost the entire month of Halloween. The entire month of October, your entire lead up to Halloween is 2 movie franchises with a few sprinkled in between. So that's incredible. And then, you have all the standalone movies. The franchises do make up a big portion of it. So like this year, Hellraiser, it's 11 movies. But they're so entertaining. Honestly, there's so much entertainment there. And what's really cool, one of the things I didn't touch upon, is a lot of these horror series and movies and stuff, they end up being adapted into comic books. There's some great comic book material for Hellraiser, Hellraiser, Aliens, Terminator. I'm not sure if Chucky or some of the other ones have them. Some of the other series have been adapted into video games. There was the Friday the 13th game, which kind of fell apart because of this lawsuit between, well, it's not a lawsuit, it was this like this new law or changing of the laws where creators had the opportunity to retrieve or buy back their writing, like the characters that they created, and this like misconstrued or confused judge was like, the guy who wrote the first Friday the 13th, they gave him the rights to the Jason character, but why it's being appealed and what's happening right now is that like nobody, like he in the first Friday the 13th movie there is no Jason. As just a little spoiler here, the movie came out a really long time ago. It was his mother. It was Mrs. Voorhees. So like, yeah, he gave the name Voorhees, and yeah, he named the character, but he didn't name he didn't design the character. He didn't design Jason. He didn't create any of that. The character that we recognize as Jason doesn't really appear until the fourth movie. Like, he dons the goaltender's mask, but the overalls and all of that doesn't actually make an appearance until like the third or fourth movie. And at that point, the original writer from the first Friday the 13th movie, he wasn't involved whatsoever. So yeah, I would say he's owed some royalties. He created the foundation of the Friday the 13th series, but to turn around and take all of those rights, the character images, the name, all of that from the studio and just give it to this individual, I think is totally unjust. And the studio is appealing it. And unfortunately, what that means is that all of the Friday the 13th projects that were in the works when this whole debacle, like this whole law debacle thing, you know, the ownership of the rights came up, it basically just destroyed them all. There was a few, I think there was a reboot in the work, and there was a video game. That's what I was getting to. They were adapted into video games, and there was this really good one, Friday the 13th, and it got completely derailed because they basically put a mortician. I don't know the word for that one. I don't think it's morticiary though. They put a hold basically on allowing the video game developers and anybody basically on using the icon, the name, the images that are associated with Friday the 13th until they could decide like who the rightful owner of the character and all this trademark stuff is. So unfortunately for that, we've lost Friday the 13th for the last few years, and we haven't gotten another movie or another video game iteration. And that original video game, it was really good. Basically it created this new kind of dynamic in video games where instead of like being two teams of 5, you know, trying to champion each other, you know, team deathmatch or something, it was like a 1v5, so like one person against 5 people or more. And the reason is that like that one person is playing as Jason, and the other people are all the camp goers, the camp counselors and stuff, and they have to try to survive against Jason. So they have that one person playing the game, walking around, you know, he's super strong, he has weapons, and all the other people have like flashlights, and they have to try to run around and try to avoid him and be the last one alive. I think I to be honest, I never had a chance to play the game, so I think there was some other, that's my cell phone ringing, that was the theme song from Ninja Turtles there. So I think there was some potential in that game. There's also some other games, Dead by Daylight, that uses like a whole melange of characters, horror characters, but in the same style. I'm not 100% sure on the gameplay mechanics of that one, but it's a horror game, and I know that they use real characters. They've imported real horror movie characters into that game, so that's a really cool, world that we're like an adaptation of some of these really awesome characters and this lore. You know, it's cool to be able to pick up a controller and be Freddy and, you know, use his big claws, or, you know, be, you know, maybe Pinhead from Hellraiser, and you can throw out your chains, and if you know these characters, they all have like signature weapons and signature styles. So adapting these characters and into playable characters is something that I thought was really cool, and it's a really cool medium. As a big fan, it's something that's really enjoyable, and that's horror movies. In a nutshell, it's something that I really enjoy. It takes these the movie all these movies that I enjoy, and the genre and the industry, and then there's a little bit more to it. You have to do some practical effects. You have to translate all of these amazing horrible scenarios into something on screen, and it requires to be in a bit MacGyver-ish at the beginning. When they were making some of the early movies, they really didn't have the knowledge on how do we do this, how do we we have it in the script, they wrote it, the director wants it to look a certain way, but how are we going to do it? And a great example is in the first Halloween movie. It came out in 1978, and they were the producer, the person that had the production company. His idea was that he wanted it to be more like the horror stories, the scary stories that they used to tell on the radio. That's what he grew up with, and it was more about being scary through subversion. And he came up with all these ideas. So one of the cool things, if you're a bit squeamish, Halloween has no blood. There's no blood in the first Halloween movie. I don't say that about the next Halloween movies. After the first two, they definitely get a bit, blood. There's more than just the blood on the tip of the knife, But in that first Halloween movie, the vision was that it was going to be more imaginative, like the scary parts. Like you had to. It's more about the ambiance, right? It's dark. They have the theme music going, and his idea, which would become the basics for basically horror movies, which wasn't what they had set out to do. They were just trying to make a movie. Was they give you a street scene, and the background characters or the main character is walking into a house on the left, and your eyes are following there, and then maybe at the last second or the entire time on the right side of the screen in the shadows is Michael. It distract them on the left, scare them on the right. And that was it's a great trope. It became a trope, but it was a great idea. It's a great concept. And, we see that all over horror now. So it's such a multitude of things that go into horror movies that make them so interesting. And that's what the appeal is for me. That's why I love horror movies. And I hope you've heard of maybe a movie you didn't hear about before, or this is, giving you that little encouragement to maybe turn all the lights on a nice sunny day this October. If you're uninitiated to horror movies, maybe during the day. I will admit there are horror movies that I will only watch during the day. If it has to do with ghosts or dark rooms, I don't want it to be dark when I watch that movie. I want to watch the movie and then go for a nice walk in the sunlight and remind myself that that I'm not going to get eaten in the darkness, because it's still fantasy, but it can still make you a bit scared. You can still get the goosebumps, and if you're walking up from the basement and you're turning the lights off, you just start to go a little bit faster, and then you just scramble up the stairs as you turn off that last light. These are things that just horror movies that you just kind of remember in the back of your head, like, oh no, you're going into that dark back room. It's kind of just it's good fun. It's good fun, especially around Halloween. Maybe jump out at somebody with a Michael Myers mask. And it's all good fun. So that's horror movies. This has been episode 8. I really enjoy horror movies. I hope you've really enjoyed this episode, and stay tuned for more episodes. We got a lot coming up. This has been episode 8 of The Nerd Review. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be talking more movies and TV shows in upcoming episodes. And until then, this is The Nerd signing off.